Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Let's paint a steam tank.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. And this Halloween, get it 15% off using the code SPOOKY. Click the link in the video description for Baron of Dice and use the code at the checkout. After doing a test paint for a Nuln handgun a couple of weeks back, I seem to have found myself working slowly on an Empire army, and I really wanted to paint a steam tank. I haven't painted one for years, probably around 2010 maybe when I had my last one. I got rid of that years ago, and I definitely didn't paint it Nuln last time. I painted it all metallic, and I thought it'd be a fun opportunity to paint something cool for the channel. Now this is an eBay rescue. They are available at the moment directly from Games Workshop, so I could have got myself a new one, but this was a pretty good price and I thought I could fix it up. I have primed it and cleaned it up a little bit. I found a few more errors and things I needed to tidy up on there. You can see the little marks where I've rubbed the paint off at the front, removing a little bit of a notch that was there. It's missing a couple of little bits, but I can tidy it up a little bit more and I can add a few little extra bits here and there and hopefully get it looking good. So I did a few more fix-up, added a couple of shields to the front to cover those marks, and the miniature was black, which is what I needed it to be. And then I started with white in my airbrush. I just wanted to go and add some white in where the wood panels would be. And while the miniature is predominantly black, I did want to kind of use my favourite method of doing wood at the moment, which is using some contrast paints. So I got my airbrush out and very carefully just added a bit of a Zenithal style airbrush layer to those wooden areas. There's a little bit of overspray, but I've been using the airbrush for a little while now, so I can be fairly accurate. And I've just got the light in there the way I wanted, and it gives the effect that I'm going to want later on. So it's worth doing this, even if I have to go back and touch up the black a little bit. And that's what I'm doing here, using the cheerily named Doom Death Black from Two Thin Coats. I'm just going in and filling in any areas where there was lots of overspray. So the kind of bosses on the centre of the wheels here, it was impossible to go in and add the white to the wooden areas, which is between the spokes, without overspraying here. It was just no way I was going to do that. So I'm just painting these back in by hand. And then was just a little bit here on the turret. There was a little bit of overspray that I wanted to cover up. I'm not too worried about the other areas because they're all going to be metallics and be covered by metallic paint anyway. Next it's Death Reaper, which is the mid-tone and a little triad with the Doom Death Black, and I'm just doing a very subtle highlight to that black. It's a very dark grey, so it's very hard for you to see on the camera, but I'm just getting a little bit of extra light where the peaks there of that armour, and then towards the bottom of that armour skirt. And it's much the way I like to paint tanks when I'm painting Horus Heresy or World War II. I like to do that kind of almost false fake lighting effect that just looks cool, and I'm doing the same here on the turret. Bit of light in the beginning, the same on the wheels as well, just light towards the bottom. I just like the way it looks. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but it's all about what looks cool sometimes. Now we have Dungeon Stone Grey, which is actually the highlight in that little triad. And again, if you can pick colours in triads, I talk about this a lot in my videos, and you're not sure about colour choices, sometimes it's hard to pick colours that work together. If you find companies that do triads like these Two Thin Coats, they just really helps you out here because you know they generally work together because that's the way they're designed. And you can see I'm just reinforcing that previous technique, so I'm focusing towards the bottom of the skirt there, towards the tops of those little peaks of the metal as they kind of force outwards in the armour. And what you see there is what begins to look like grey, but from dark at the top to light at the bottom. It's a really nice transition. It draws the eye, and it will just look like a far better black than just a plain flat surface. Now, if you don't have an airbrush, you can achieve a very similar effect with lots of layers of dry brushing, so I can suggest doing that, or even just working your normal black recipe, being that flat black with a little bit of an edge highlight. That could work as well, and you could still follow the rest of this video tutorial. This is just my favorite go-to metallic recipe. I use it all the time. It's almost become a bit of a default. So we have decayed metal and black metal from Scale 75's Metal and Alchemy range, followed by Game Air Silver. And I start with the decayed metal here. It's got browny, bronzy undertones to it. And most of this will get covered, but I just really love the little bits that show through on the silvery layers. It just gives it so much more depth to the colour, and you can have a lot showing through or hardly any showing through, but I really like using it as a base. You don't have to, you can go straight in with the more steel kind of colours if you want to, but I just love what this does. Now you can see here that I'm using the airbrush here for these first layers of metal. Much of this I'll have to do using a regular hairy brush, but I'm trying to save some time, but also I quite like the smoother transitions I can get with my airbrush. So I've been very careful here not to spray on the black. You saw me using a little bit of paper just to kind of cover off some of the black and mask it off. I could have spent ages masking it all off, but sometimes that takes longer than it does just to paint it by brush. So there's always a balance of time for me. This is for my army. This isn't for display. I want it to look cool and nice, but I also want to keep it sort of manageable and not drive me insane. So I'm being very careful here to try and keep the paint where I want it and do as much of the airbrush as I can to save time and get that effect that you get from the airbrush. But ultimately you can just do this all with a hairy brush and lots of layers of dry brushing, and I will have to do that on lots of other areas coming up next. And here we are with that stage, the black out of the way, so you've got a better background view, you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. So this is just decayed metal with the hairy brush, and I'm picking out all these workings here around the engine area at the back of this steam tank. Again, I'm starting with this decayed metal, and I'll be building up through the black metal and then the Game Air Silver. And then in other areas of the tank, I'll be starting with the decayed metal, but I'll also be building up golds over the top. And it works as a really, really nice base for both. And like I said, it just adds to that depth, in my opinion, to the colour and to the texture. And it works really well when you add oil washes and things later on, which we'll be doing. And this is probably one of the most time-consuming parts of the paint job. The base layer, it seems to be the most boring part and always takes the longest as well. You have to be more careful. When you're adding further layers and you're highlighting, you can usually leave a little bit around the edges because you want to leave some of that previous colour showing. But in this case, I'm just having to be careful here to only pick out that raised detail on the wheels. And these are going to be gold eventually, but like I mentioned a moment ago, we're using the same base colour here because it works well for steel or for golds. It's just a matter of chipping in here. There's so much metal on this tank, as you'd expect for the kind of machine that it is, and just taking my time, and I'm giving that nice neat first base layer of this decayed metal, and once that's done, the rest of it's a lot more fun. So with that base layer of decayed metal down, including the little bits of other colours what I did with the airbrush, I've even put the miniature on its base as a bit of basing texture. But now we're going to continue with the black metal and the Game Air Silver, the same as I did with the airbrush, but building on those areas that I had to use the hairy brush for. And I'm starting with some dry brushing rather than just painting it all in. I want there to be a little bit of texture showing through. I want some of that decayed metal, that browner metal, that bronzy colour showing through. And the best way to achieve that without an airbrush is to go in there and do some dry brushing. This is one of the softer style dry brushes you see around so much at the moment. This one's actually from Knott's Hobbies, as is the texture palette, and there will be a tool I use later on for sponging that's from them as well. There's a link in the video description with you get a discount if you go through that link. So if you are interested in those products, go and check them out. So Knott's Hobbies in the video description. Now as we get to this stage, it gets a lot harder to do dry brushing without getting it on any of the black we've done already, and we don't want to overbrush here. Now luckily this dry brush has got a bit of an angle to it. It's a little bit thinner in one way, so I can add a little bit of colour here, but I'm getting to that point now and I'm thinking I'm going to have to stop using the dry brush. So I turn to the Knott's Hobbies thing I was talking about. So this is a sponge holder for sponge chipping. The sponges they send you are these quite high density ones, which are really great and have a straight edge on them, and you can cut them. They're a bit like makeup appliers, I've been told. I don't use them myself, but they're a bit like that sort of blusher, I think. I don't know, it's not blusher, is it? I haven't got a clue. But like that sort of memory foam style makeup applicator you can get, apparently. It's the same kind of material. But because I've cut them to straight edges, I can do a really good job of just keeping in the lines, so to speak, with it. So they're really, really good. I also use them with the kind of rough foam that you find in your blister packs and things like that as well, and that's really good for chipping in terms of more of a weathering style effect, whereas this is almost sponging as a layering kind of effect. Both really good techniques and work very, very well, and I'll probably try out different types of sponge using this holder. And then of course there are parts that you just have to use with a fine brush anyway, like the edges of this panel here on the top of the tank. It's a bit rinse and repeat now with the Game Air Silver, so this is the brightest colour. I'm trying to go super, super light with it here. There's very little paint on the brush, so I'm just catching the edges where the light would hit here. I really don't want to obliterate the previous two layers that are on there. It's very hard to see the brown now, but you can see the miniature much closer to it. It's still in all those recesses. There's still a transition from the browner colour through to this lighter colour that you see now. And as I move down the side of the tank, I want to make use of some of those sharp edges as well. And there's so little paint on this brush here that I feel comfortable going over the black sharp edges as if the paint will have worn away a little bit, and you can catch it quite well in it. And it really sort of picks out the detail. It's something that a lot of people would go in and do an edge highlight in grey. I'm painting this tank more in the way that I would paint a World War II tank or a Horus Heresy tank. I'm going to be using lots of weathering, lots of effects and things like that. I want it to look gritty and real. Still got some vibrant colours in it, and that's why I bring in the kind of the fantasy themes. So I'm bringing the reds and yellows later on. But in terms of the condition of the tank, I want to treat it a little bit like I would some World War II armour. And still with the Game Air Silver here, you could even come back and use that sponging that I was doing before. And just towards the top of the turrets here where the light would hit most, there's a little bit of transition from top to bottom. Now this is Cygor Brown, Garagax Sewer and Mantis Warriors Green, and this is the reason I airbrushed in the white earlier on the wood. I added a little bit of touch of water to each and thinned them actually on my wet palette. And this is the way I like to do a nice dark weathered wood effect, and I've used it in a couple of tutorials now on the land ship, on some artillery pieces and things as well. What you see here, I've watered it enough that it just runs into the recesses on the detail of the wood panelling, and because it's zenithal-ish colour on top of the white, it just really picks out that detail straight away. And I'm just wet blending it, mixing these three different colours together, allowing them to run and mix together, so you get this effect of aged wood that's got a little bit of green and a little bit of moss and all of that built into it. And it's just a really cool effect. I love doing it, and it's a one coat and done. I'm not going to come back and highlight this wood here because I've started from that white base and the paint is thin enough. It really is just going into the recesses here, so it's a bit of a wash, a bit of a glaze mixed in together really, but it's given a really nice effect. We've got Berserker Red, Sanguine Scarlet and Demon Red for two thin coats. I'm just really enjoying these paints at the moment. They compare very well to Citadel range. If you go to the Transatlantic Games website, you can see a really great conversion to the Citadel paint range and to Army Paint as well, I believe, though they might be the older range, not the new current one. Just really enjoying the paints. There are alternatives. Just pick 3 reds in a triad if you don't use them, but I would recommend them. I really enjoy using them. If you like Citadel paints and Citadel colours, I think you'll find them very good as well, especially if you like Citadel paints but don't like the pots. This is a really good alternative. But anyway, we're here with the punchy colours, and the whole idea with the punchy colours is adding some red onto the shields. We want them to be Nuln, we want them to look like the army, so it's a base layer of the darker colour of the triad, and then we're going in with the mid-tone now, and I'm just leaving some of that Berserker Red, that darker red, in about 30% of the shield, mostly focusing around the centre where it's dipped in or around the central design. So I'm just kind of focusing in on the lighter areas, so almost going around the edges, leaving a little bit of dark in the centre. If I feel it's gone a little bit too light, because I've got all 3 colours on my wet palette at the same time, I'm just wet blending them together. So I'm quickly rinsing my brush, grabbing a little bit of the darker tone, adding it back into the darker area, and then just blending it out to the paint, and it just blends together very well. These paints are great for wet blending, really good for it. Now, after a first layer of highlight of the mid-tone, I did go around for a second layer more towards the edges, and it just reinforces that colour. I'm using quite thinned paints here on the wet palette, so going back for a second layer just makes it a bit more punchy, a bit bolder. And by the time we get to the demon red, which is the highlight, I'm just focusing towards the edges of the most part. So it starts as an edge highlight, moving the model around, using the edge of my brush to make it easy for me rather than doing a wobbly, shaky line. But then what I do is I allow it to blend in a little bit onto the shield, and that's when I use the same methods I had before. If it's a bit too bright, just grab a bit of that medium tone, bring it back in. I've even covered the little bolts or the little rivets that are holding them on as red, as if they've been painted as well, but I wanted them to stand out so that they get a highlight, and it just works really well. So what you should have is a subtle transition from the darkest colour around the centre to the lightest around the edges, particularly at the top where the light would hit the most. Dark Sun Yellow, Skulker Yellow and Yellow Flame, again for the same reasons, enjoying these paints at the moment, work really well. Citadel do some fantastic yellows as well, and again these just match them very, very well. So if you're looking for some Citadel colours as the base colour, you'd be looking at something like Avalanche Sunset and so on. I'll let you go and find your own trial or conversions there, or use the conversion charts from the Transatlantic Games website, as I said already. So I've gone in with a base layer over all of the yellow areas, and then I go in with the mid-tone, much as I did before, layering up, leaving a little bit of that darker area showing, probably covering around 70% of it, so it's just a little bit in the shadows. Then for that top highlight, I really am just going around the edges towards the top of the little comet tails, maybe on the little dot in the centre when it's a scroll or something, focusing on the edges of it, the same way as I did with the shields. I wasn't 100% happy with the darkest area, so I grabbed some Nazdrag yellow contrast paint and used it as a glaze here, just to add in to the shadow here. So on the corners of this little scroll, just to add a little bit of dark colour into the shadow, and then right in the centre of that panel, just adding a thin curved line along the centre, just so it looks a little bit darker in that recess, and it really just makes the highlights pop a little bit more and adds a little bit more depth to it. So with the reds and yellows down, it's time to return to the metallics, and this is Necro Gold from that same Metal and Alchemy range from Scale 75. I love Scale 75 metallic paints, they're just fantastic. I've tried a few other ranges again more recently, thinking that maybe I'm just not trying new things, but these are just so silky smooth, they go for the airbrush fantastically, thin really well. I just absolutely love them. I've not found a better all-round metallic range of paint in quite a long time, and I just love them. So definitely go and give them a go if you can get hold of them. So I'm just using this Necro Gold now. It's quite a dull, desaturated gold, almost brass effect, and I'm just using it to go and pick out all of the untouched decayed metal areas. Just like I have with most of my mid-tone highlights here, I'm covering around 70% of what was there before, so leaving a little bit of the decayed metal showing in places, but essentially using it as a base for this gold. At this stage, you've got to be a little bit careful with some of the details that you're picking out, because you don't want to mess up the reds and things you've already done. But then we go to Elven Gold, which is another colour from that same range, and it's the perfect highlight for the Necro Gold. And what I'm doing here is focusing towards the peaks of those little armour areas and then blending them in to the centre a little bit. I don't want to completely do a full edge highlight all the way along. I want the different tones of metal to be there, and I want it to look like the light is just catching a little bit more on those little points that are sticking out. You can perhaps see that a little clearer down the bottom, and I'm doing something similar with just picking out the edges in certain areas of that kind of design, that filigree along the bottom. I don't want to completely cover it in all the Elven Gold because it'll just look too bright, so I'm just picking up the edges of some of the little bits of design just to give it a slightly different tone. Now it's starting to look pretty close to done, but I like to dirty my miniatures up a little bit. I like to use oil washes instead of regular standard washes most of the time at the moment, and for that I'm going to be using grease and dark mud. Again, these are from Scale 75. It's from their ready mixed Soilworks oil range. So these are ready mixed oil paints. You can buy individual oil paints, artist ones and artist white spirit, and mix your own. A lot of people do, but I go for the easy mode quite often, and I like these ready mixed ones and I use them all the time. So I'm just using very thin layers of grease, which is almost a sepia tone, slightly darker than sepia, and I use this for 90% of all the stuff I'm going to do here. I'll only save the dark darker colour for certain areas later on. So I painted in between some of the wooden planks just to add a little bit of extra detail there, and I'm painting over pretty much every metallic area just to really add some shade in there. With the oil washes, you can play around with them and clean them off again afterwards. We'll come to that in a moment. But I'm just able to be a little bit more liberal with them. The other side of it is they just give an even better effect, because as the spirits evaporate, you're left with a darker shade in the recesses. It just looks like weathering. It looks more realistic. So it's all round win-win, especially when you're working on things like this where there's lots of metals and metallics and stuff on there. Now there's quite a lot to do on there. I'm using it a bit like a pin wash, where essentially you want it to run into the recesses or into the crevices here. So I'm just running it around where the lip of that nice posh gold design meets the side of the armour. And what will happen in there, it will dry really, really nice and dark in the deepest point, but it'll evaporate away from the rest of it. It'll just look really, really nice and neat, and like you've just painted a really nice, neat thin line, rather than just slapping it on, which is essentially what I'm doing here. And I continue to add it around an awful lot of the miniature, just picking out little bits of detail, any rivets or bolts and things, just adding a little dot, and it just runs around those rivets and sort of pulls around the edges, but not in the centre. It's so good for that kind of thing. I'm trying to leave it mostly off the flat grey or black areas that we've done, but it doesn't matter if it goes over a little bit. But if it does, I just try and blend it out and smooth any large areas off. But like I said earlier, you can take it back off if you have any big mistakes. And we're still very much on the grease at the moment, the grease colour, and I'm using it on my basing as well, so it's going straight over all of the little kitty litter rocks I've got on there, and these little stones, these little paving slab bits I've put as a little feature on the corner as well. So here I have some AK thinners. So you really want thinners that are designed for use for miniatures or for artists. What you don't want is the stuff that you find in your hardware store for use for cleaning your paintbrushes or stripping paint in your house and your DIY stuff, because that stuff is too harsh, will strip your paint, it smells awful. This stuff smells but nowhere near as bad. And what I'm doing here is I've got a little bit of clean thinner or white spirit in the cap, an old brush again, paper towel next to me, I dip it in the clean, and then I'm just taking anywhere that it was too much oil paint on there. So anywhere there's some pooling or it looks a little bit dark, so on this flat surface on the top of the gun here, I'm able to remove it again, just by almost painting it away. It cleans straight off because the oil paint takes so much longer to dry. You leave it in the recesses, you build that shine back in if you think you've dulled it too much. Anywhere you've got it that you don't want to, you can just remove it again. So this is Paladin Flesh. It's a kind of mid to dark brown, pop a little bit on my dry brushing palette. And here I'm using that tool again, but I'm actually going to be using a little bit of older sponge, the sponge you find in your blister packs and things like that, to do a bit of sponge chipping. Now GW Rhinox Hide is my usual go-to for one of these. My pot had run out and dried out, and this was absolutely fine. But if you've got Rhinox Hide, it's my go-to brown for doing some chipping on armour plates like this. I'm doing the same thing now, but with the Gamer Silver, and just going back and just adding a few little sort of sponged dents and things to the edges of the metal where the paint would have banged into things and rubbed away and worn away. And it just adds a really, really nice effect. Quite often add little scratches and dents and chips and things to the metallic areas as well, because it adds a bit of a highlight to them. But again, it just means that metal doesn't look like it's been buffed shiny. It makes it multi-tone, makes it look battered and worn, which is what this thing should be. So this is Dirty Down Rust. It used to be called Model Mate stuff. I love it. I've been using it for years. And it works in quite a few different ways. It's water soluble for a start, even though it smells like it shouldn't be. I'm just sort of stippling it on here. And I'm trying to cover and hide some of the defects in this eBay rescue. So there was a mark there, looks like a hair. It's not. It's where the glue was able to drip. Whoever built this originally put far too much glue on when they glued these shields on the sides. And you can see that kind of gloopy and spilled down. So there was this funny little tide mark here. So I'm covering it in weathering. It's also fun to just add little areas of rust elsewhere. You don't want to go too heavy on it. You don't want to look too terrible. This isn't a Nurgle thing, and maybe this would have been looked after much better by the engineers and it wouldn't become rusty, but I just quite like the effect it gives. And then I was having fun with it, so I added the odd little rust streak running down from the bolts at the side. Again, maybe they're made of a slightly different metal and the water's got in there and it's just rusted and a little bit's run down, and it'll get cleaned up and repainted, for the next campaign, but while it's on campaign it looks a little bit more war-torn. So this is light sienna. It's my favourite dry pigment that I use on a lot of my bases, and I just brush it into the textured detail and blow the excess off, and then it just sits so I don't seal it, because it's not going to be touched, and because it's within the detail of the texture it doesn't seem to go anywhere either. Often brush it in on feet and boots and things like that. I'm brushing it in around the skirt here, a little bit of the tank, just adds a little bit of texture where the dirt would have blown up onto the miniature, and it's dried and it looks like grind in sort of dirt or mud or something, and I just really like the effect. And this is the kind of thing I'd be doing on a World War II tank or a Horus Heresy tank, so I'm trying to treat this the same way. And we're closing in on the end now, so it's a matter of adding a few little tufts of grass growing up between the paving slabs around near the rocks, and just using some Vallejo thick mud here. This is European mud. This is a mud effect rather than what's already on the base, which is a texture paint, a bit like your Sterling mud from GW, that kind of thing. So this is just adding a bit of effect, so just spreading the mud over. I like putting a little bit of mud towards the side of a tuft or something, so it looks like it's part of the ground rather than just this weird tuft on its own. And you can also put little splodges of mud up around the skirt of the tank as well. Again, this is what I'd be doing with a World War II tank, a Horus Heresy tank or something like that, trying to make it look gritty and grim and real worldly, even though I've got that red sort of punchy shields on there, which makes it a little more Warhammer fantasy. Adding this mud and all this weathering effects and oils and things hopefully kind of gives me the best of both worlds. And before we know it, it's time to paint the edge of the base black, which just always tidies it up, always makes it look finished in my mind, and we are done. Now, I probably should be painting through my ranks of handgunners and my spearmen and all of the bulk stuff that I need for my army, the core stuff, but it was too tempting to do a painting tutorial for a steam tank. They're such amazing machines. I've enjoyed painting the ones I have in the past. It's just been so many years. I'll have to pick another one up because I want to paint one with a crewman, an engineer poking out the top and all those extras as well. But it was good fun doing this one, and it was good fun doing a first black one. Definitely the easier way to paint one of these quickly would have been to airbrush so much of it metallic and get all those layers in, like I did for the little bit of airbrushing, but do it all metallic all over. And I was very tempted to do that, but having chosen Nuln, I thought it would be strange not to give it that kind of black armor effect. And it's given me some ideas of how I might do the knights later on in the army as well, because a similar effect would look pretty cool. Do you use any of the sort of the more military modelling style weathering techniques and that kind of things on your fantasy miniatures? Have you got an Empire army on the go at the moment, or are you waiting for the launch, which hopefully will be next year? Hopefully even January time would be amazing. But I'd love to hear in the comments what you're working on for Warhammer the Old World, and check out all the other stuff on the channel that's Warhammer the Old World as well. There's absolutely loads of it on there, and other game systems and things as well.
Thank you very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Just as a reminder, there are links to all of the things I mentioned in the video below. So my affiliates, my sponsor Baron of Dice, and also for my Patreon as well. And it's a great time to join the Patreon because you can get entered into the monthly giveaways now. And this month, as it stands, you still have time to sign up and be entered in the chance to win Bolt Action version 3, brand new hardback copy of the book. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.
Dear, your Reichsubers here. You sure you have to go? Come back and visit soon. Oh, bugger. Blasted rain.